What happens when privilege meets prejudice at the gates of America's most exclusive academy? For 12-year-old Marcus Thompson, what should have been the proudest day of his young life turned into a nightmare of humiliation and rejection. He had earned his place through pure academic brilliance, but some doors, it seemed, were designed to stay closed to boys who looked like him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But the administrators at Whitmore Preparatory Academy made one catastrophic mistake. They had no idea who was about to walk through their doors. They had no idea that the quiet, determined woman who would arrive moments later controlled a fortune worth more than their entire endowment. And they certainly had no idea that their world was about to change forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Whitmore Preparatory Academy, its golden rays illuminating the ivy-covered brick buildings that had stood as monuments to educational excellence for over a century. Founded in 1887 by railroad magnate Theodore Whitmore, the Academy had educated the children of presidents, Supreme Court justices, and titans of industry. Its Gothic architecture spoke of tradition, its perfectly maintained grounds whispered of exclusivity, and its tuition of $68,000 per year ensured that only a very select few could walk through its wrought iron gates. Marcus Thompson stood at those gates now, his small hands gripping the straps of his navy blue backpack, his heart hammering against his ribs with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made his stomach flutter. At 12 years old, he possessed the kind of intellectual curiosity that made librarians smile and teachers lean forward in their chairs. His dark eyes, magnified slightly behind wire-rimmed glasses, took in every detail of the imposing campus before him. The Gothic Revival buildings with their pointed arches and decorative stonework, the perfectly trimmed hedges that lined the cobblestone pathways, the bronze statue of the founder that commanded the central courtyard. This was supposed to be his first day at Whitmore Prep, the culmination of months of rigorous testing, interviews, and academic preparation. Marcus had scored in the 99th percentile on every entrance examination. His essay on quantum mechanics had left the admissions committee speechless, and his recommendation letters from his public school teachers painted the picture of a once-in-a-generation mind. He was not just academically gifted, he was transformative, the kind of student who elevated everyone around him through his infectious love of learning. His mother, Dr. Victoria Thompson, had received the acceptance call 3 weeks ago while reviewing quarterly reports in her downtown office. The voice on the other end had been crisp and professional, congratulating Marcus on his exceptional performance and welcoming him to the Whitmore family. Victoria had closed her eyes and felt a surge of pride so intense it took her breath away. Her brilliant, curious, beautiful son would have opportunities she had only dreamed of as a child growing up in the South Side of Chicago. Victoria Thompson was a force of nature disguised as a soft-spoken woman in tailored business suits. At 42, she had built Technova Solutions from a single-room startup into a global technology empire worth $2.8 billion. Her company specialized in artificial intelligence and machine learning applications for healthcare, and her innovations had revolutionized diagnostic medicine across 3 continents. She held 14 patents, had delivered keynote speeches at MIT and Stanford, and had been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of the most influential CEOs under 50. But despite her success, despite the Manhattan penthouse and the fleet of luxury cars, despite the respect she commanded in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Tokyo, Victoria had never forgotten the sting of being underestimated. She remembered the scholarship interview at Northwestern University, where the interviewer had expressed surprise at her SAT scores. She remembered the venture capital meetings where potential investors questioned whether a young black woman could handle the complexities of running a tech company. She remembered every slight, every raised eyebrow, every moment when her competence had been questioned before she had even opened her mouth. She had built her empire not just through brilliance, but through an ironclad determination to prove that excellence knew no color, no gender, no background. Every success was not just personal, it was a statement, a declaration that talent could not be contained by narrow minds or limited imaginations. And now, watching her son prepare for his first day at one of the nation's most prestigious institutions, she felt that same fierce determination burning in her chest. Marcus adjusted his tie, a navy blue silk piece that his mother had helped him select the night before. They had spent the evening going over his schedule, discussing his course load, and talking about the opportunities that awaited him. Advanced calculus with Dr. Pemberton, who had taught Nobel laureates. Latin with Professor Morrison, whose translation of Cicero was considered definitive. Physics with Dr. Chin, whose research on particle acceleration had been featured in Scientific American. The boy took a deep breath and walked through the gates, his footsteps echoing off the cobblestones as he made his way toward the main administration building. Other students were arriving now, stepping out of black SUVs and luxury sedans, their uniforms perfectly pressed, their confident voices carrying across the courtyard as they greeted friends they hadn't seen since the spring semester ended. Marcus observed them with the analytical mind of a scientist, noting their easy familiarity with the environment, their casual assumption that they belonged in this rarefied world. He reached the main entrance, a massive oak door adorned with the school's crest, and pulled it open. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, with marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of distinguished alumni lining the walls, and the kind of hushed, reverent atmosphere that spoke of serious academic pursuits. A bronze plaque near the entrance listed the names of Whitmore graduates who had gone on to become presidents, senators, and Supreme Court justices. The reception area was elegant and intimidating, with leather furniture arranged around Persian rugs and tall windows that let in streams of morning light. Behind a mahogany desk sat Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, the head of admissions, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and the kind of patrician bearing that suggested generations of good breeding. She was reviewing files when Marcus approached, her manicured fingers turning pages with practiced efficiency. Marcus cleared his throat politely and smiled his brightest smile, the one that had charmed teachers and librarians throughout his academic career. Mrs. Ashford looked up, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. She quickly composed herself and offered a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The morning light streaming through the tall windows caught the dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere in the reception area. Marcus stood there, his acceptance letter carefully folded in his backpack, his schedule memorized, his excitement barely contained. He had dreamed of this moment for months, imagining himself walking these hallowed halls, learning from the brilliant minds that had shaped generations of leaders. He had no way of knowing that in the next few minutes, his world would be turned upside down. He had no way of knowing that the smile on Mrs. Ashford's face was masking a growing sense of unease. And he certainly had no way of knowing that 15 minutes later, his mother would be standing in this very same spot, about to make a decision that would send shockwaves through the entire educational establishment. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8:30, marking the official start of the school day. Marcus Thompson, brilliant student and beloved son, stepped forward to claim his place in the world. He was about to learn that sometimes the hardest lessons come not from textbooks, but from the cruel realities of a world that wasn't quite ready for boys who looked like him to succeed. "Good morning," Marcus said politely, his voice carrying the careful diction his mother had taught him for important occasions. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I'm here for my first day of classes." Mrs. Ashford's fingers paused on the file she was reviewing. She looked at Marcus more carefully now, taking in his perfectly pressed uniform, his polite demeanor, and the intelligence that sparkled behind his glasses. Her smile became more strained as she reached for her computer keyboard. "Thompson," she murmured, typing the name into her system. "Let me just pull up your information." The seconds stretched uncomfortably as she stared at her screen, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, suddenly aware of the marble floor's cold hardness beneath his dress shoes. Behind him, other students continued to stream through the entrance, their voices creating a low hum of excited chatter about summer vacations in the Hamptons and skiing trips to Aspen. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Ashford said finally, her tone carefully neutral, "but I don't see any record of Marcus Thompson in our incoming 7th grade class." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "There must be some mistake. My mother received the acceptance call 3 weeks ago." She spoke with someone from the admissions office personally. Mrs. Ashford's eyebrows rose slightly. "I handle all acceptance calls personally, young man. I can assure you that I would remember making such a call." She turned her monitor slightly so Marcus could see the screen, though the angle made it difficult for him to read. As you can see, there's no Marcus Thompson enrolled for this academic year. The confidence that had carried Marcus through the academy gates began to crumble. He could feel the eyes of other students and parents on him now, their conversations quieting as they sensed drama unfolding. A tall boy with sandy hair and the kind of casual arrogance that came from generations of privilege nudged his friend and whispered something that made them both snicker. "Could you check again, please?" Marcus asked, his voice smaller now. "Maybe under a different spelling, or perhaps the system hasn't been updated?" Mrs. Ashford sighed with the patience of someone dealing with a persistent child. "I've checked twice now. There is no enrollment record for any Marcus Thompson. Perhaps you're thinking of a different school. There are several fine public institutions in the area that might be more suitable." The word suitable hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus understood its implication immediately, even at his young age. He had heard that tone before, seen that look in the eyes of adults who had already decided what he was capable of based on what they saw when they looked at him. "My test scores," Marcus said desperately, reaching into his backpack. "I have copies of my entrance exam results. I scored 98th percentile in mathematics, 99th in verbal reasoning, and my essay on quantum entanglement received the highest marks in the school's history." Mrs. Ashford barely glanced at the papers Marcus pulled out. "I'm sure you're a very bright young man, but academic records can be misinterpreted. The entrance examinations for Whitmore Preparatory are extremely rigorous. We see many students who believe they've performed better than they actually have." Behind the reception desk, Mr. Gerald Fitzpatrick emerged from an inner office. At 63, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the Director of Student Affairs, he had spent 37 years at Whitmore Preparatory, watching over the sons and daughters of America's elite. His grandfather had been roommates with a Rockefeller, his father had played tennis with a Kennedy, and Gerald himself had cultivated relationships with the kind of families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university libraries. "Is there a problem here, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone who had attended boarding school in New England. "This young man seems to believe he's enrolled here," Mrs. Ashford replied, her tone suggesting that Marcus's belief was both misguided and somewhat amusing. "He's quite insistent, but of course, there's no record of his admission." Mr. Fitzpatrick studied Marcus with the cool assessment of a museum curator examining a piece that might be authentic or might be an elaborate fake. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus Thompson, sir. I was accepted 3 weeks ago. My mother, Dr. Victoria Thompson, received the call personally." "Dr. Thompson," Mr. Fitzpatrick repeated thoughtfully. "And what does your mother do for a living?" "She's the CEO of Technova Solutions," Marcus said, pride creeping back into his voice despite his growing confusion and distress. "She's developed artificial intelligence applications for medical diagnostics. She's revolutionized how doctors detect early-stage cancers." Mr. Fitzpatrick exchanged a look with Mrs. Ashford that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. It was the kind of silent communication that adults perfected when they wanted to exclude children from important conversations. "I see," Mr. Fitzpatrick said slowly, "and I'm sure she's very successful in her field. However, Marcus, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. Whitmore Preparatory has very specific admission standards, standards that go beyond simple academic achievement." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew he didn't want to hear the answer. "Well," Mr. Fitzpatrick continued, his tone taking on the patronizing quality of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child, "Whitmore has always been an institution that values tradition, heritage, and cultural fit. Our families have been part of the Whitmore community for generations. The Ashfords, for instance," he gestured toward Mrs. Ashford, "have been associated with the school since 1923. 3 generations of Ashfords have walked these halls." Mrs. Ashford smiled proudly at this acknowledgement of her family's legacy. "My grandfather was in the same graduating class as Charles Whitmore, Jr.," she added. "We understand the importance of maintaining the school's character and values." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "But I earned my place here. My test scores prove that I belong academically." "Academic ability is certainly important," Mr. Fitzpatrick agreed, his tone suggesting that it was actually quite secondary to other considerations. But Whitmore is about more than just academics. We're building future leaders, young men who will take their place in society's most important institutions. That requires a certain background, a certain understanding of how the world works. The implication was crystal clear, even to a 12-year-old boy. Marcus had the wrong background, the wrong understanding, the wrong skin color for Mr. Fitzpatrick's vision of future leaders. "I think," Mrs. Ashford said gently, as if she were doing Marcus a favor, "that you might be happier at a school where you'd fit in better, where you'd be around other students who share your perspective." The casual cruelty of her suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around him, the marble lobby continued to buzz with activity as legitimate students checked in for their first day. A group of 8th grade boys passed by, their conversation full of references to summer homes and sailing lessons. One of them glanced at Marcus and whispered something to his friends that made them all turn to stare. Marcus's hands were shaking now as he fumbled with his backpack, trying to find more documentation that might prove his right to be there. His acceptance letter was somewhere in the main compartment, along with his class schedule and the welcome packet that had arrived by courier just 5 days earlier. "Here," he said, pulling out the crisp envelope with the Whitmore crest embossed in gold. "This is my acceptance letter. It has your signature on it, Mrs. Ashford." Mrs. Ashford took the letter with obvious reluctance, as if handling something distasteful. She examined it for a moment, her frown deepening. "This appears to be irregular. The formatting isn't quite right, and I certainly didn't sign this. It looks like someone has attempted to create a convincing forgery." "That's impossible," Marcus protested, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. "That letter came directly from your office. The courier required a signature from my mother personally." Mr. Fitzpatrick stepped closer, his presence now actively intimidating rather than merely authoritative. "Young man, are you suggesting that our admissions office is lying? Are you implying that Mrs. Ashford doesn't know her own signature?" The accusation of forgery hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus realized with growing horror that not only was he being denied entry to the school, but he was now being accused of fraud. The injustice of it was so overwhelming that tears began to prick at the corners of his eyes, despite his desperate attempts to maintain his composure. "I would never forget anything," he whispered. "I earned my place here fairly." "I'm sure you believe that," Mrs. Ashford said with false sympathy. "But sometimes when we want something very badly, we can convince ourselves that we've achieved it through alternative means." The lobby had grown quieter now, as more people became aware of the confrontation unfolding at the reception desk. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, the mixture of curiosity and judgment in their eyes. He was becoming a spectacle, a cautionary tale about what happened when people reached beyond their proper place. In 15 minutes, everything would change. But for now, Marcus Thompson stood alone in the marble lobby of Whitmore Preparatory Academy, his dreams crumbling around him like autumn leaves. The whispers had spread through the lobby like wildfire. Parents pulling their children closer, students craning their necks to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the reception desk. Marcus could feel the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. "Perhaps," Mr. Fitzpatrick said, his voice carrying across the now hushed lobby, "we should discuss this matter in my office. We don't want to create any more of a scene than necessary." The suggestion wasn't really a suggestion at all. It was a directive, designed to remove the embarrassing spectacle from public view. Marcus nodded numbly, clutching his backpack against his chest like a shield. As they walked toward the administrative wing, he caught fragments of conversation from the watching crowd. "Poor boy," one mother murmured to another. "Someone should have explained to him earlier." "It's really quite sad," came the reply. "These misunderstandings happen when people don't understand how these institutions work." Quote, a cluster of 7th grade boys had gathered near the trophy case, their voices carrying, despite their attempts at discretion. "Can you believe he actually thought he belonged here?" one of them said with a smirk. "My dad says there are scholarship programs at the public school specifically for kids like him." Marcus's face burned with shame and anger. "Kids like him." The phrase echoed in his mind as they walked down a hallway lined with portraits of former headmasters, all stern-faced white men in academic robes. Their painted eyes seemed to follow his progress, silent judges from generations past who had never imagined someone like Marcus walking these sacred halls. Mr. Fitzpatrick's office was a monument to tradition and exclusivity. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, photographs of graduating classes dating back to the 1920s, and framed letters from grateful alumni who had gone on to positions of power and influence. Behind his massive mahogany desk hung his own diplomas from Exeter and Harvard, along with a portrait of Theodore Whitmore himself. "Please, sit down," Mr. Fitzpatrick said, gesturing to a chair positioned directly across from his desk. The setup was clearly designed to intimidate, with Marcus forced to look up at the man who held his fate in his hands. Mrs. Ashford took a seat beside the desk, her expression one of patient concern, like a doctor about to deliver unpleasant but necessary news to a patient. "Now then," Mr. Fitzpatrick began, settling into his leather chair with the confidence of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar conversations, "let's try to sort this out properly. You mentioned that your mother received an acceptance call. Do you remember exactly when this supposedly occurred?" 3 weeks ago, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It was on a Tuesday afternoon. Mom was in her office reviewing quarterly reports when the call came in. She was so excited that she called me immediately to tell me the news." Mr. Fitzpatrick made a note on a legal pad. "And you're certain it was someone from our admissions office who made this call?" The person identified themselves as representing Whitmore Preparatory Academy, Marcus replied. "They congratulated me on my exceptional performance and welcomed me to the Whitmore family. Those were the exact words my mother repeated to me." Mrs. Ashford leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, I want you to understand that we receive dozens of calls every month from parents hoping to secure admission for their children. Sometimes these conversations can be misinterpreted. Perhaps your mother spoke with someone from our office about the possibility of application, and she misunderstood the nature of that conversation." The implication was clear. His mother had either lied to him or had fundamentally misunderstood what she had been told. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger on behalf of Dr. Victoria Thompson, a woman who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire through precise communication and strategic thinking. "My mother doesn't misunderstand business conversations," Marcus said firmly. "She's the CEO of a major corporation. She knows the difference between a possibility and a confirmation." Mr. Fitzpatrick's eyebrows rose at Marcus's tone. "Young man, I appreciate your loyalty to your mother, but adults sometimes tell children what they think they want to hear. Perhaps she was trying to spare you disappointment." "She wouldn't lie to me," Marcus insisted, his voice growing stronger despite the overwhelming circumstances. "And she certainly wouldn't forge documents or create fake acceptance letters. She's one of the most ethical people I know." "I'm sure she is," Mrs. Ashford said with patronizing sympathy. "But sometimes, when we want something very badly for our children, we might bend the truth a little. It's completely understandable." The casual accusation that his mother was a liar hit Marcus like a slap. These people, who had never met Dr. Victoria Thompson, who knew nothing about her background or her achievements, were dismissing her integrity as if it were insignificant. "You don't know anything about my mother," Marcus said, his careful politeness finally cracking. "She's revolutionized medical diagnostics. She holds 14 patents. She's been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine. She doesn't need to lie about anything." Mr. Fitzpatrick's expression hardened. "That may very well be true, but success in business doesn't automatically qualify someone for the Whitmore community. We have standards here that go beyond professional achievement." "What standards?" Marcus demanded. "What possible standard could I not meet? I scored higher on your entrance exams than any student in the school's history. My essay was praised by your own faculty. My recommendations were glowing." Quote, "Academic performance is only one factor in our admissions process," Mr. Fitzpatrick explained, with the patience of someone stating obvious facts. "Whitmore Preparatory has maintained its reputation for excellence by carefully selecting students who embody our values and traditions. Students whose families understand and appreciate the unique culture we've built here." Marcus stared at him, the full weight of what was happening finally becoming clear. "You're not rejecting me because of my academic performance. You're rejecting me because I'm black." The words hung in the air like an accusation of murder. Mrs. Ashford gasped softly, her hand fluttering to her throat as if she'd been personally attacked. Mr. Fitzpatrick's face flushed with indignation. "That is an absolutely outrageous accusation," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Whitmore Preparatory Academy does not discriminate based on race, religion, or national origin. We are an equal opportunity institution that welcomes qualified students from all backgrounds." Then why am I being denied entry? Marcus pressed. If my academic qualifications are superior to your normal standards, and if you don't discriminate, what possible reason could you have for rejecting me? Mr. Fitzpatrick leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from indignation to cold calculation. Because, young man, you are not actually qualified for admission. Your alleged test scores, your supposed acceptance letter, your claimed communications with our office, none of these things are real. They are the products of either wishful thinking or deliberate deception. That's not true, Marcus said desperately. Everything I've told you is accurate. You can verify my test scores with the testing company. You can check your own phone records for the call to my mother. Mrs. Ashford shook her head sadly. Marcus, we've already checked our records thoroughly. There is no evidence of any communication with your family, no record of your test scores, no documentation of your alleged acceptance. But the courier delivered my welcome packet, Marcus protested. It came with tracking information and required a signature. There's a paper trail. Anyone can create convincing forgeries these days, Mr. Fitzpatrick said dismissively. Desktop publishing software makes it remarkably easy to produce documents that look official. I'm afraid someone has played a very cruel joke on you and your family. Quote, the accusation of forgery was now being expanded to include professional-level fraud. Marcus realized with growing horror that not only was he being denied admission, but he was being painted as either a victim of elaborate deception or a participant in criminal activity. Why would anyone do that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps, Mrs. Ashford suggested gently, someone wanted to embarrass our institution. There are organizations that actively seek to create controversies where none exist. They might have targeted your family as unwitting participants in their agenda. The implication was chilling. Marcus was being told that his presence at the school was not just unwelcome, but was potentially part of some conspiracy designed to damage Whitmore's reputation. I just want to go to school here, Marcus said, tears finally beginning to flow despite his efforts to remain strong. I just want to learn. I want to study advanced calculus and Latin and physics. I want to be around other students who love learning as much as I do. Mr. Fitzpatrick's expression softened slightly, though his resolve remained firm. I understand that, Marcus. And I'm sure you'll find excellent educational opportunities elsewhere. There are many fine institutions that would be delighted to have a student of your background. The careful pause before the word background made its meaning unmistakable. Marcus was being told, in the politest possible terms, that there were schools for people like him, and Whitmore Preparatory Academy was not one of them. Outside the office windows, the first period bell was ringing. Legitimate students were hurrying to their classrooms, their backpacks filled with textbooks that Marcus would never get to read, their minds focused on lessons he would never get to hear. The day he had dreamed about for months was slipping away, replaced by a nightmare of humiliation and rejection that would scar him forever. In 10 minutes, everything would change. But for now, Marcus Thompson sat in that office, his dreams in ruins, facing the cruel reality that in some places, excellence wasn't enough. A soft knock interrupted the tense atmosphere in Mr. Fitzpatrick's office. His secretary, Ms. Jennifer Walsh, cracked the door open just enough to poke her head through. Her usually composed demeanor seemed rattled, and there was an urgency in her voice that made everyone in the room look up. Mr. Fitzpatrick, she said, her voice slightly breathless. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at the front desk that requires your immediate attention. Mr. Fitzpatrick frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption during what he considered a delicate conversation. Can't Mrs. Henderson handle it? I'm dealing with a rather sensitive matter here. Ms. Walsh glanced nervously at Marcus, then back at her boss. Sir, there's a woman here who's quite insistent about speaking with you personally. She says she's Dr. Victoria Thompson, and she's asking about her son's enrollment. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized what was happening. His mother had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine first-day check-in, probably bringing the additional paperwork she had mentioned the night before. She had no idea that her son was currently being accused of fraud and conspiracy. Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mrs. Ashford exchanged a meaningful look. This was an unexpected complication in what they had assumed would be a simple matter of removing an unwanted presence from their institution. Tell her I'll be with her in just a moment, Mr. Fitzpatrick said, his tone suggesting that Dr. Thompson's arrival was more of an inconvenience than anything else. We're just finishing up our conversation with young Marcus here. Ms. Walsh hesitated. "Sir, I don't think she's going to wait much longer. She seems very determined. And there are quite a few parents and students watching." The implication was clear. Whatever was about to happen would have an audience, and that audience included some very influential families whose opinions mattered to the school's reputation. Mr. Fitzpatrick stood up from his desk, smoothing his tie and adjusting his jacket. "Very well. Marcus, I think it would be best if you remained here while I speak with your mother. Mrs. Ashford will stay with you." "I want to see my mom," Marcus said, his voice stronger than it had been in the past hour. The knowledge that his mother was in the building, fighting for him, had rekindled something in his chest that the administrator's cruel words had nearly extinguished. "That's not necessary," Mrs. Ashford said firmly. "Your mother and Mr. Fitzpatrick can handle this matter between adults. Children shouldn't be involved in these kinds of discussions." Marcus wanted to protest, but something in Mrs. Ashford's tone suggested that defiance at this moment would only make things worse for both him and his mother. He slumped back in his chair, trapped and helpless, while the man who had just accused him of fraud went to face the woman who had built an empire through integrity and determination. Mr. Fitzpatrick walked through the corridors of Whitmore Preparatory with the confident stride of someone who had handled countless difficult parents over the years. Wealthy fathers demanding special treatment for mediocre sons. Helicopter mothers insisting that their precious children deserved exceptions to established rules. He had perfected the art of firm but polite dismissal, of making unreasonable demands seem petty and selfish. As he approached the main lobby, he could hear voices carrying across the marble floors. One voice in particular stood out, clear, measured, and carrying the kind of authority that made people stop and listen. It was a voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms and delivering presentations to skeptical investors. Dr. Victoria Thompson stood near the reception desk, and her presence seemed to alter the very atmosphere of the lobby. She was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray business suit that spoke of understated elegance and serious money. Her posture was perfectly straight, her hands clasped calmly in front of her, but there was an intensity in her dark eyes that suggested volcanic forces barely contained beneath a professional surface. Around her, the normal flow of school activity had slowed to a crawl. Parents who had been chatting about weekend plans were now straining to overhear the conversation. Students walking to their next classes found reasons to linger in the lobby. Even the faculty members who had business in the administrative wing seemed reluctant to leave. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly receptionist who had replaced Mrs. Ashford at the front desk, looked visibly uncomfortable as she tried to explain the situation to Dr. Thompson. Her usual confidence in handling school business had evaporated in the face of this poised, determined woman who spoke with the quiet authority of someone used to getting answers. "Dr. Thompson," Mr. Fitzpatrick said as he approached, extending his hand with a smile that he hoped appeared both welcoming and authoritative. "I'm Gerald Fitzpatrick, Director of Student Affairs. I understand there's been some confusion about your son's enrollment." Victoria Thompson turned to face him, and Mr. Fitzpatrick felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. This wasn't just any concerned parent. This was the woman whose photo had graced the cover of Forbes magazine 3 months earlier, whose company's artificial intelligence innovations had been featured in Time's Inventions of the Year issue. Standing before him was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America, and she was looking at him with the kind of focused attention that made boardroom opponents nervous. "Mr. Fitzpatrick," she said, her voice carrying easily across the now quiet lobby, "there seems to be some confusion about my son's first day. Your staff is telling me that Marcus isn't enrolled here, which is obviously impossible since I have all the documentation confirming his acceptance." Mr. Fitzpatrick felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. This conversation was playing out in front of some of the most influential families in the state. People whose opinions could make or break reputations in their insular social circles. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office," he suggested, hoping to move the conversation away from public scrutiny. "I think we can resolve this right here," Dr. Thompson replied calmly. "It should be a simple matter of checking your computer system and confirming my son's enrollment." Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening to the exchange with growing nervousness, turned to her computer screen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed Marcus's name into the search function. The seconds stretched uncomfortably as the system processed her request. I'm not finding any record under that name," she said quietly, her voice barely audible in the hushed lobby. Dr. Thompson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but those who knew her from the business world would have recognized it as the moment when she transitioned from negotiation mode to combat mode. "That's interesting," she said, her tone remaining perfectly conversational. "Because I have the acceptance letter right here, along with the welcome packet that was delivered by courier, and the deposit receipt showing that I paid the full year's tuition in advance." She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a manila folder containing several documents. The sight of official paperwork seemed to make Mrs. Henderson even more nervous. "May I?" Dr. Thompson asked, though it wasn't really a question. She opened the folder and began laying documents on the reception desk where everyone in the lobby could see them. The acceptance letter bore the official Whitmore preparatory letterhead and was signed by Mrs. Ashford. The welcome packet included a detailed course schedule, dormitory information, and a personal note from the headmaster welcoming Marcus to the Whitmore family. The deposit receipt showed a wire transfer of $68,000, paid in full 3 weeks earlier. Mr. Fitzpatrick stared at the documents, his mind racing. These weren't amateur forgeries created on a home computer. These were perfect reproductions of official school correspondence, complete with watermarks, official seals, and accurate signatures. If they were fake, they represented a level of sophistication that would require significant resources and expertise. "These documents appear to be," he began, but Dr. Thompson cut him off with a raised hand. "Authentic," she finished. "Yes, they are. Because my son was legitimately accepted to this institution based on his exceptional academic performance. Now, where is Marcus? And why isn't he in his first period calculus class?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the lobby, the assembled crowd was beginning to murmur. Parents were pulling out their phones, some to text friends about the unfolding drama, others to discreetly record what was quickly becoming a very public confrontation. Mr. Fitzpatrick realized with growing alarm that this situation was spiraling far beyond his control. The documents in front of him were undeniably real, which meant that either his staff had made a catastrophic error or something far more serious was happening. "Dr. Thompson," he said carefully, "I think there may have been some kind of administrative error. Perhaps we should." "Where is my son?" Dr. Thompson repeated, her voice cutting through his diplomatic evasions like a blade. "I want to see Marcus right now." The lobby had fallen completely silent now. Even the students who had been pretending to walk to class had stopped moving, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers that usually created an atmosphere of refined elegance now felt like the setting for a courtroom drama. In his office, Marcus sat with Mrs. Ashford, both of them listening to the voices echoing from the lobby. He couldn't make out every word, but he could hear his mother's voice, strong and clear and utterly uncompromising. For the first time since walking through Whitmore's gates that morning, Marcus smiled. The cavalry had arrived. The silence in the lobby stretched for what felt like an eternity before Mr. Fitzpatrick finally found his voice. "Dr. Thompson, I assure you this is all a terrible misunderstanding. If you could just give me a moment to—" "No." The single word cut through his diplomatic scrambling like a knife. Dr. Victoria Thompson's voice carried the authority of someone who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile boards of directors. "I will not give you another moment to manufacture excuses. You have had my son for over an hour, and I want to see him immediately." Mrs. Henderson, the receptionist, looked frantically between Dr. Thompson and Mr. Fitzpatrick, clearly hoping someone would tell her what to do. Her hands hovered over her phone, uncertain whether to call security or the headmaster. "Of course," Mr. Fitzpatrick said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "He's in my office with Mrs. Ashford. They're just reviewing some paperwork. Nothing serious." "Then you won't mind if I join this paperwork review," Dr. Thompson replied, though it wasn't a request. She began walking toward the administrative wing with the purposeful stride of someone who owned every room she entered. The crowd in the lobby parted before her like water, parents and students instinctively recognizing that they were witnessing something significant. Mr. Fitzpatrick hurried to catch up, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely concealed panic. As they walked down the hallway lined with portraits of former headmasters, Dr. Thompson's sharp eyes took in every detail. The mahogany paneling, the Persian rugs, the crystal chandeliers. all symbols of the old money establishment that had controlled American education for generations. She had seen similar displays of traditional power in boardrooms across the country, and she knew exactly how to navigate them. When they reached Mr. Fitzpatrick's office, Dr. Thompson didn't wait for permission to enter. She pushed open the door to find her son sitting across from Mrs. Ashford, his face tear-stained but determined. The sight of Marcus in that vulnerable state sent a cold fury through her that she carefully controlled behind a mask of professional composure. "Marcus," she said softly, and the relief in her son's eyes was painful to witness. "Mom," he whispered, standing up quickly. "They're saying I don't belong here. They're saying you lied about the acceptance call and that our documents are fake." Dr. Thompson's gaze shifted to Mrs. Ashford, who suddenly seemed much smaller under the scrutiny of those intelligent, piercing eyes. "Mrs. Ashford, I presume? The woman whose signature appears on my son's acceptance letter?" Mrs. Ashford stood up shakily, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Dr. Thompson, there seems to have been some kind of administrative error. We're trying to sort it out." "An administrative error," Dr. Thompson repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "Is that what you call denying entry to a legitimately accepted student? Is that what you call accusing a 12-year-old boy of fraud?" Mr. Fitzpatrick stepped forward, attempting to insert himself between the two women. "Dr. Thompson, I think there's been a misunderstanding on all sides. Perhaps we can—" "The only misunderstanding," Dr. Thompson interrupted, her voice rising slightly for the first time, "is your assumption that you could treat my son this way without consequences." She pulled out her phone with deliberate precision and began scrolling through her contacts. "I think it's time we involve some additional parties in this conversation." Mr. Fitzpatrick's face went pale. "Dr. Thompson, surely that's not necessary. I'm certain we can resolve this internally." "Internally?" Dr. Thompson's laugh was sharp and humorless. "The way you resolved it internally, when you accused my son of forgery? The way you resolved it internally, when you suggested he might be part of some conspiracy to embarrass your precious institution?" Marcus watched his mother with a mixture of awe and relief. This was Dr. Victoria Thompson in full command mode, the woman who had built Technova Solutions from nothing into a global powerhouse. This was the CEO who had made grown men sweat in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. "Let's start with your board of trustees," Dr. Thompson said, selecting a contact on her phone. "I believe I have the personal numbers of at least 6 board members. Interesting how often we run into each other at charity galas and technology conferences." Mrs. Ashford's face went white. The board of trustees represented the most powerful families in the state, people whose displeasure could end careers with a single phone call. "Wait," Mr. Fitzpatrick said desperately. "Please, let's not involve the board. I'm sure we can work this out between ourselves." "Between ourselves?" Dr. Thompson repeated. "You mean the way you worked it out when you told my son that children like him should know their place? When you explained to him that academic excellence isn't enough if you don't have the right background?" The accusations hung in the air like toxic smoke. Marcus had clearly told his mother everything about the conversation in this office, every coded insult and barely disguised racial slur. "I never said anything about his background," Mr. Fitzpatrick protested weakly. "No," Dr. Thompson agreed, "you were much more sophisticated than that. You talked about cultural fit and family heritage. You explained that Whitmore has standards that go beyond academic achievement. You made it clear that my son, despite having the highest test scores in your school's history, somehow didn't meet those mysterious standards." She began dialing a number on her phone. "I think it's time the board heard about these standards directly." "Please," Mrs. Ashford spoke for the first time since Dr. Thompson had entered the office. "There's no need to involve outside parties. This was clearly a mistake in our computer system. We can have Marcus enrolled and in his classes within the hour." Dr. Thompson paused, her finger hovering over the call button. "A computer mistake? Is that your explanation? Your computer system accidentally deleted all records of my son's acceptance, accidentally removed his test scores from your database, and accidentally generated false information about our communications?" The silence that followed was deafening. Both administrators realized they had painted themselves into a corner with their elaborate conspiracy theories and accusations of fraud. "Or perhaps," Dr. Thompson continued, her voice deadly quiet, "this wasn't a computer error at all. Perhaps this was a deliberate attempt to exclude a qualified black student from your institution, disguised as administrative confusion. The word black landed in the room like a grenade. Up until this moment, everyone had danced around the obvious truth, hiding behind coded language and diplomatic evasions. Dr. Thompson had just stripped away all pretense and named the real issue. "That's a very serious accusation," Mr. Fitzpatrick said, his voice hoarse. "Yes, it is," Dr. Thompson agreed, "and it's one I'm prepared to make very publicly. I wonder how your donors will react when they learn that their charitable contributions are supporting institutional racism. I wonder how the Department of Education will respond to a formal discrimination complaint backed by documented evidence." Mrs. Ashford sank back into her chair as if the weight of the implications had physically pressed her down. A discrimination lawsuit against Whitmore Preparatory would be front-page news in every major newspaper. The school's reputation, built over more than a century, could be destroyed in a matter of weeks. "What do you want?" Mr. Fitzpatrick asked quietly, the fight finally gone out of him. Dr. Thompson looked at her son, who was watching the proceedings with wide eyes. She could see the hurt and confusion still written across his young face, the damage that had been done by an hour of systematic humiliation and gaslighting. "I want my son enrolled in his classes immediately," she said. "I want a written apology from both of you acknowledging that this was a discriminatory act disguised as administrative error. And I want assurances that no other child will ever be subjected to what Marcus experienced today." "Done," Mr. Fitzpatrick said quickly. "All of it, whatever you need." "I'm not finished," Dr. Thompson continued. "I also want a full investigation into your admissions processes to ensure this doesn't happen again. And I want diversity training implemented for all administrative staff." Mrs. Ashford nodded frantically. "Of course. Absolutely. Whatever you think is appropriate." Dr. Thompson studied both of them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she made a decision that would change everything. "Actually," she said slowly, "I think there's a better solution. Marcus, how would you feel about attending a school where excellence is truly valued? Where brilliant students are celebrated regardless of their background?" Marcus looked confused. "What do you mean, Mom?" Dr. Thompson smiled for the first time since entering the building. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted vulnerable prey. "I mean, sweetheart, that perhaps it's time for Whitmore Preparatory Academy to have new ownership, new leadership, new values." The implications of her words hit both administrators like a physical blow. Dr. Victoria Thompson wasn't just threatening to expose their discrimination. She was threatening to buy their entire world. 3 months had passed since that fateful morning in the marble lobby of Whitmore Preparatory Academy. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the campus as students made their way between classes. But everything about the institution had fundamentally changed. The bronze nameplate outside the headmaster's office no longer read Whitmore Preparatory Academy. It now bore the elegant script of Whitmore Thompson Institute for Academic Excellence. The change was more than cosmetic. It represented a complete transformation in philosophy, leadership, and values. Dr. Victoria Thompson had made good on her promise with ruthless efficiency. Within 48 hours of that confrontation in Mr. Fitzpatrick's office, her legal team had initiated contact with the school's board of trustees. What they discovered was an institution teetering on the edge of financial collapse, propped up by endowments that were hemorrhaging money due to poor investment decisions and declining enrollment among elite families who were increasingly choosing more progressive institutions. The acquisition hadn't been hostile. It had been inevitable. Dr. Thompson's offer to purchase Whitmore Preparatory for $340 million had arrived at precisely the moment when the board was facing a choice between selling or watching their prestigious academy slowly die. The vote had been unanimous. Gerald Fitzpatrick's corner office had been transformed into a state-of-the-art college counseling center, staffed by advisors who specialized in helping first-generation college students navigate the application process. Fitzpatrick himself had submitted his resignation the day after the acquisition was announced, citing, quote, philosophical differences with the new direction. His letter of recommendation for his next position had been notably brief. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford had lasted exactly 2 weeks under the new management before accepting a generous severance package. Her replacement was Dr. Kenji Nakamura, a former admissions director from MIT who had revolutionized STEM education access for underrepresented students. The admissions process now relied on blind evaluations focused purely on academic merit and potential. The changes extended far beyond personnel. Dr. Thompson had invested an additional $150 million in infrastructure improvements, creating new laboratories, expanding the library, and establishing scholarship funds that ensured 50% of each incoming class consisted of students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. The exclusive club had become a genuine meritocracy. Marcus walked through the transformed hallways with a confidence that had taken months to rebuild. The initial weeks had been challenging, not because of academic difficulties, but because of the social dynamics with classmates who had witnessed his humiliation and subsequent vindication. Some had treated him with newfound respect, tinged with wariness, understanding that his mother's influence made him untouchable. Others had struggled to reconcile their preconceptions with the reality of his intellectual capabilities. His Latin class had become legendary among the faculty. Professor Morrison, who had initially been skeptical of the new direction, now openly praised Marcus's translations of Cicero as some of the most sophisticated he had seen from a seventh grader. In advanced calculus, Dr. Pemberton had begun assigning Marcus additional problems that challenged even her graduate school knowledge, pushing him toward mathematical concepts typically reserved for university students. The physics laboratory where Dr. Chen conducted her research had become Marcus's second home. His theoretical work on quantum entanglement, originally dismissed by Mr. Fitzpatrick as precocious nonsense, was now being reviewed by professors at Columbia University who were considering inviting him to participate in their summer research program. But the most significant changes weren't academic, they were social. The student body that had once been uniformly white and wealthy now reflected the full spectrum of American talent. Maria Santos, whose father worked construction but whose mathematical abilities rivaled those of any Wall Street executive's child, had become Marcus's closest friend and study partner. David Kim, a scholarship student from Queens whose family had immigrated from South Korea, brought perspectives on engineering that challenged even the most privileged students' assumptions. The transformation hadn't been without resistance. Several prominent families had withdrawn their children from the school, unable to accept the new egalitarian environment. The Ashford family had been among the first to leave, citing concerns about maintaining standards. Their departure had been followed by others who valued exclusivity more than excellence. But for every family that left, 3 new ones applied. Word had spread through academic circles that Whitmore-Thompson Institute was producing extraordinary results. College placement rates had actually improved, with students gaining admission to top universities based on genuine preparation rather than legacy connections. Dr. Thompson had established her office in what was formerly the Board of Trustees' private dining room, a space that had previously been used for intimate dinners where admission decisions were influenced by donation sizes and family connections. Now it served as a workspace where she could monitor the school's transformation while continuing to run Technova Solutions. She reviewed weekly reports that tracked not just academic performance but social integration and student satisfaction. The data told a story of remarkable success. Test scores were rising across all demographics. Disciplinary incidents had decreased by 70%, and student surveys revealed unprecedented levels of engagement and enthusiasm for learning. The ripple effects extended beyond the campus boundaries. Other elite institutions were quietly reassessing their own admission practices, recognizing that the Whitmore-Thompson model was attracting the kind of publicity they envied. Applications from top students were flooding in from across the country, drawn by the school's reputation for nurturing genuine excellence rather than perpetuating privilege. Local newspapers had run feature stories about the Whitmore miracle, documenting how an institution once synonymous with exclusivity had become a beacon of educational equity. National education policy experts were studying the transformation as a potential model for reform at similar institutions. The financial success had exceeded even Dr. Thompson's projections. Donations from alumni who supported the new direction had more than offset the losses from families who had withdrawn their support. Tech industry leaders, impressed by the school's integration of cutting-edge laboratory facilities with rigorous traditional academics, had contributed millions to expansion projects. Marcus's relationship with his mother had evolved as well. The experience had shown him a side of her strength he had never witnessed before. Not just the business acumen that had built Technova Solutions, but the fierce protective instinct that had transformed humiliation into triumph. Their evening conversations now included discussions about leadership, justice, and the responsibility that came with privilege. On quiet weekends, they would walk through the campus together, watching students from dozens of different backgrounds collaborate on projects that would have been impossible under the old regime. Dr. Thompson had created more than just educational opportunity. She had built a community where intellectual curiosity transcended social boundaries. The old Whitmore Preparatory Academy, with its emphasis on heritage and connections, had died on that September morning when a brilliant 12-year-old boy was denied entry because of his skin color. In its place had risen something unprecedented, an institution where the only qualification that mattered was the hunger to learn and grow. As autumn turned to winter, Marcus Thompson walked through snow-covered grounds that now truly belonged to students like him. The transformation was complete, but the revolution in American elite education was just beginning. 5 years had passed since that transformative September morning. The story of Marcus Thompson and Whitmore Thompson Institute had become legendary in educational circles, but its impact extended far beyond the walls of any single institution. What had begun as one mother's fight for her son's dignity had evolved into a movement that challenged the very foundations of educational inequality in America. Dr. Victoria Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard University, delivering the keynote address at the National Conference on Educational Equity. The audience of educators, policymakers, and activists hung on her every word as she shared the lessons learned from transforming one of America's most exclusive academies into a beacon of inclusive excellence. The morning my 17-year-old son was denied entry to a school he had rightfully earned admission to, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium, I was forced to confront a fundamental question. Do we accept systems that judge our children by their appearance, or do we have the courage to demand better? In the audience, Marcus listened with the mature perspective of someone who had lived through transformation. Now a senior at Whitmore Thompson Institute, he had just been accepted to MIT, Stanford, and Harvard with full scholarships. But more importantly, he had become a mentor to younger students who arrived at the school carrying their own burdens of doubt and discrimination. The statistics Dr. Thompson shared were staggering. In the 5 years since the Institute's transformation, similar changes had rippled through private education nationwide. 17 other elite institutions had adopted the Whitmore-Thompson model, implementing need-blind admissions and investing heavily in diversity recruitment. The results were consistently remarkable: higher academic achievement, increased innovation, and stronger college placement rates across all student demographics. We discovered something that should have been obvious all along, Dr. Thompson continued. When you select students purely based on intellectual merit and hunger for knowledge, rather than family connections or financial resources, academic excellence flourishes. When young minds from different backgrounds collaborate, they create solutions that none of them could have achieved alone. The Institute had become a pipeline to top universities, but its graduates were making their mark in ways that transcended traditional measures of success. Maria Santos, Marcus's former study partner, was now developing sustainable energy solutions at Princeton. David Kim had designed a revolutionary water purification system that was being implemented in developing nations. These weren't just academic achievements. They were contributions to humanity, born from the collaborative environment that had replaced the old exclusionary culture. Dr. Thompson's presentation included video testimonials from faculty members who had initially resisted the changes. Professor Morrison, the Latin teacher who had once questioned whether certain students could handle classical languages, now spoke passionately about how diverse perspectives had enriched his curriculum. Students were connecting ancient Roman texts to modern social justice movements, finding relevance in classical education that had been missing for generations. The resistance we encountered, Dr. Thompson explained to the Harvard audience, came not from students or teachers, but from parents and alumni who mistook exclusivity for excellence. They feared that expanding opportunity would somehow diminish their own children's prospects. What we proved is exactly the opposite. When everyone rises, we all benefit. The economic impact had been equally transformative. The Institute's emphasis on innovation and critical thinking had produced students who were creating startups, developing patents, and contributing to technological advancement at unprecedented rates. Major corporations now recruited specifically from Whitmore Thompson, recognizing that its graduates brought both exceptional skills and diverse perspectives to complex challenges. But perhaps the most profound changes weren't measurable in test scores or college acceptances. They were visible in the daily interactions between students who, under the old system, would never have crossed paths. The student body president was now Aisha Muhammad, a refugee from Somalia whose family had arrived in America with nothing but determination. Her vice president was Jonathan Rothschild, heir to a banking fortune, who had learned to see leadership as service rather than privilege. Marcus had become the bridge between these worlds. His experience as both victim and beneficiary of the system's transformation had given him unique insights into the psychology of change. He regularly spoke to incoming students about resilience, excellence, and the responsibility that came with opportunity. During the question-and-answer session at Harvard, a skeptical voice emerged from the audience. "Dr. Thompson," asked a man who identified himself as a trustee at another elite institution, "how do you respond to critics who argue that you've simply replaced one form of elitism with another, academic elitism?" Dr. Thompson's smile was knowing. She had faced this question dozens of times, and her answer had been refined through years of similar conversations. "The difference," she replied, "is that academic achievement is something any child can pursue, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. When we select students based on their curiosity, their work ethic, and their potential to contribute, we're creating opportunity, not limiting it. Every student at our institute earned their place through their own efforts. That's not elitism, that's meritocracy." The transformation hadn't been without costs. Gerald Fitzpatrick had struggled to find comparable employment after leaving Whitmore, his reputation forever linked to the discrimination scandal. He eventually took a position at a small private school in rural Virginia, where he reportedly implemented more inclusive policies, perhaps having learned from his mistakes. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford had left education entirely, opening a boutique in Greenwich that catered to the same social circles she had once served as gatekeeper. The irony wasn't lost on those who remembered her role in the original incident. She now depended on the goodwill of families who valued exclusivity over excellence. But their personal consequences paled in comparison to the broader impact of their actions. The discrimination that had seemed normal, even justified, in elite educational circles, was now recognized as not just morally wrong but strategically foolish. Institutions that continued to rely on legacy admissions and donation-influenced acceptance were finding themselves increasingly irrelevant in a competitive global economy that demanded innovation and adaptability. Dr. Thompson concluded her Harvard presentation with a challenge that resonated throughout the academic community. Every child deserves the chance to reach their full potential. When we create barriers based on race, class, or family connections, we rob not just those children but society itself of the contributions they might make. The question isn't whether we can afford to be inclusive, it's whether we can afford not to be. As the audience rose in sustained applause, Marcus felt the weight of his journey from that humiliated 12-year-old to the confident young man he had become. The path hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, social challenges, and the ongoing pressure of representing something larger than himself. But he had learned that excellence was its own form of resistance, that achievement in the face of discrimination was the most powerful response to those who would limit human potential. The story of Marcus Thompson and Whitmore Thompson Institute had become more than an inspirational tale of individual triumph. It was proof that systemic change was possible when people of courage and means chose to use their power for justice, rather than perpetuating inequality. As students around the country faced their own battles against discrimination and limited opportunity, they carried with them the knowledge that transformation was possible, that a single moment of injustice, when met with determination and resources, could become a catalyst for changes that would benefit generations of students yet to come. The marble lobby where Marcus had once stood in humiliation now welcomed thousands of visitors each year, educators, policymakers, and parents who came to witness proof that America's promise of opportunity for all was not just rhetoric, but achievable reality. The lesson was simple but revolutionary. When we judge people by the content of their character and the strength of their minds, rather than the color of their skin or the size of their bank accounts, everyone wins. Excellence flourishes when it's given room to grow, regardless of the package it comes in. And somewhere in laboratories and libraries across the country, young minds that might have been overlooked or dismissed were developing the innovations that would shape humanity's future. They were the true legacy of that September morning, when a mother's love met institutional prejudice and refused to accept anything less than justice. The revolution in American education had begun not with legislation or protest, but with a simple demand that every child be judged by their merit, not their melanin. And in meeting that demand, Dr. Victoria Thompson had proved that sometimes the most powerful way to change the world is to refuse to accept the world as it is. Years later, when Marcus was asked by journalists about that September morning that changed everything, he would reflect on the profound irony of the situation. The very people who had tried to exclude him from their world had unwittingly handed him the keys to transform it completely. Their prejudice had revealed their weakness. Their limited vision had exposed their obsolescence. "My mother didn't just fight for my right to attend that school," Marcus would often say in interviews. "She fought for the right of every brilliant child to be seen for who they truly are, not dismissed for what they appear to be. That fight didn't end when I got my seat in calculus class. It ended when we proved that excellence knows no color, no class, no background." The marble halls of Whitmore-Thompson Institute now echo with conversations in dozens of languages, with debates that bridge continents and cultures, with discoveries that emerge from the beautiful collision of different perspectives working toward common goals. What was once a monument to exclusion has become a testament to the power of inclusion. And every September, when new students walk through those same wrought iron gates where Marcus once stood in confusion and hurt, they enter not just a school, but a living proof that in America, when justice meets determination, transformation is not just possible, it's inevitable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.